All right. Buenas noches. Good evening. Welcome to today, Friday, 10th of July, in Tertuliando en Cuarentena, this space that we have accidentally and intentionally created that we engage in conversation with one another. Mainly, you hear me talking in Spanish. Sometimes you hear me talking in English. If you hear me talking any other language, be very surprised because those are the only two languages I can flow in. But tonight we have. Our guest is coming in directly from Michigan. I hear he's on the move uh, quite constantly, especially in these recent days. So I really am very appreciative that he gave us a little bit of his time and he's going to be sharing here with us. So without any further ado, let me bring on board Mr. Bart Campolo. Let's see. Let's do the magic here. Aga, here we go. Hello, friend.
Hey, how you doing?
There we go. Yes, yes, yes. Live and in color. Good to see you, man.
Color and I'm glad to be with you, man. How are you, Angel?
I'm pretty good, pretty good. Bart, something we like to do here is we like starting things off with the current context and the current moment that we find ourselves in, and in this current moment, in this current context, things are constantly changing and things are pretty much globalized, and I think that it's been a moment of reflection and a moment of understanding that we are very interconnected. Anything um, anything else is quite mythical. The idea of fragmentation and individualism gets quite broken down in these times where we see that what happens somewhere else can affect us and what happens here can affect other people. So I like to ask the people coming over here to tell us a little bit how these coming now to 4 months have been for you, and kind of like what routine uh, what has routine been like pre-COVID, pre-pandemic times, and how has this reshaped the routine in your life? And then you can freely share how it's been, and how have you maneuvered and navigated these times.
Wow, I think the simplest way to explain it is that the last 10 years or so, I've been in some form of kind of people work. You know, um, I was the humanist chaplain at USC. Now I'm in Cincinnati, which is where my kids grew up, and most of my sort of network is, and I spend a lot of time sitting across the table from people, talking to people one-on-one about things that are going on in their lives. And the weird thing since COVID is, of course, that most of those conversations have shifted into this nonsense.
Yeah.
Okay. And the weird thing is, like, I have this podcast audience that's all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times when those people get into trouble, when they're going through spiritual transitions or relationship issues around that kind of stuff, they go like, hey, Bart's a guy I can talk to. So they'll kind of call me for consulting,
Mm-hmm.
for counsel, right? And so I do a lot of this, but like I would do like 3 calls of this in a day, and then I would go have lunch with somebody, and then I would go for a walk with somebody and talk with them. And what I realize is now it's shifted to it's all this, right? And what I realize is that this I always gave energy to, but there was plenty of energy to give to it because I draw energy from the in-person stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But when it all went to this, I come to the end of the day and I go like, wow, this does not work for me very well. I am as pure an extrovert as you can imagine, in the sense that like I do draw my energy from people,
Mm-hmm.
and this technologically mediated conversation stuff, it's not the same. Like it's funny. Like I call myself a humanist, and like I'm a big fan of human scale, like human relations, and a lot of human relations is not just visuals and voices. It's smells and vibrations and pheromones and being in the same, and so it's been real. My routine has really been screwed up because the thing that gives me energy is gone.
Yeah, it's well, I haven't like fully hugged a person in a very long time. And as a Puerto Rican, as a Latino, it's it's something that comes quite instinctive. So yeah,
I will tell you one thing. I've been sheltering in place not only with my wife, who I do get to hug and kiss, but my daughter and son-in-law, and my 1.5-year-old granddaughter. And I really don't know how well I would be doing if I didn't have my granddaughter around me all the time. There's something about seeing a young, like somebody springing into life. She doesn't know what's going on around her.
Yeah.
She's just excited about learning about how to put a top on a can of milk or do something. And so just being around this young life has been so therapeutic for me. I can't even tell you.
Yeah. And it's those moments that actually help us be, help us be reminded of our inner child that should be present.
Right. So, bro, where are you? Like when you say you haven't hugged any, like, where are you? Who are you with?
At least I'm with my family. So I have my family, but I don't think that we have, and that's a commentary on me, of course. But I don't think that we have plenty of conversations. But I think in the routineness of everything, I mean, I cannot perhaps calculate a hug in the last few months, and on top of that, when this whole thing broke down, I was visiting home. I was in Puerto Rico, and I had to kind of rush back here where I've been living for the last year in Houston. The trip for Puerto Rico was actually to go take some exams that I need to do. I couldn't do those because they ended up canceling them. That was mid-March. So yeah, that was when the dominoes started falling down and whatnot.
And like, forgive me, but like, I'm just wondering, like, I always had this contention that if any woman in the world, if I made out with her for 5 minutes, like we just kissed, hugged and stuff for 5 minutes, I would feel a connection to that person. Like physical stuff.
Of course,
it creates a bond. So I'm just wondering, like, what do you think would happen if you went out in the hall right now, like after this call, and you took somebody in your household and you said, listen, I just want to hug you for 2 minutes. Can we just hug? Like, do you think that would do something?
Oh, and yeah, inevitably. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I think it would. And so, and if you said, like, look, I know if I needed $20, you would give it to me. I don't need $20. I know that if I needed a ham sandwich, you would make it for me. I don't need a ham sandwich, but I need a hug. My friend Bart says I need a hug right now. Like, I don't think it's healthy for you to go, even with people that, you go like, well, that's the way our relationships work. And I go like, yeah, but this is a different time, man. Sometimes you need a hug from somebody who doesn't usually give them.
Yeah. No, I concur. And I think it shouldn't be I think it shouldn't be a new routine. I think it shouldn't be a new routine. Even with everything that's going on. And no, yeah, definitely. That's
this might be the moment that those people and you break through that barrier and you go like, look, normally I would find anyone else to hug but you, but like, we're all we got. So here we go.
Yeah. Trial and error, experimenting. And
because like, I think I could get to, like, I would feel a romantic connection to anyone who I kissed for 5 minutes. I think if you hug somebody, past a certain point, like I think if you hug them, you end up feeling like a friendship connection or a supportive connection. I have this friend. It's funny. I have this friend who's a brain surgeon, and he's this crazy guy. And like, his name is James Doty. He wrote this amazing book about mindfulness called Through the Magic Shop. But he told me about going to India, and he met that hugging nun. Have you heard of the hugging nun?
I have not. No.
This nun in India who's evidently such an amazing hugger that people come from all over the world, and she teaches them, she hugs them. And he spent 3 months working with her. And I got to tell you, this guy, like, the first time I met him, after we were done talking, he said, hey, I know this sounds weird, but like, could I give you a hug? And he didn't mean take a hug. He meant give me a hug. and he wrapped me up, and I have never received a better hug than this guy. And so like and it really filled me with a sense of being welcomed and being affirmed. And it was amazing. And I realized that hugging, like many other things, is there's an element to it that it's an art, and there's an element to it that it's a craft, like something you can learn to do better.
Oh yeah.
And I know this because like my mother, who was a really terrible hugger when I was growing up, has become a very good hugger.
Yeah. Yeah.
You could. So anyway, all I'm saying is like, I think one of the things this COVID thing is doing is it's narrowing our options for kind of certain kinds of affirmation and certain kinds of contact. And we got to learn how to make it work with, it's sort of like that. Yeah. That old song that says, if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. And I don't know if that's true, but like, if you can't hug with the one you hug the one you're with.
Yeah, it's kind of you make the road by walking. It's kind of a little bit.
Yeah,
I know
I'm screwing your interview.
So no, I take that in. So a little bit about you and a little bit of a window peek that I like to use as a tool to get to know the people, or for the people who are watching to get to know the guests a little bit more. And I asked them if they could share, in summary, three experiences that they feel have become through experiences that they can point to as cathartic experiences in their lives, that have contributed to form the person that you are right now. And this involves kind of looking through the rear view mirror life. Many of the experiences we go through are acknowledged, like we can acknowledge how important they were, how transcendental they were, like way after perhaps. And now this question goes into that. It could be things as early as when you were a kid, or as recently as an hour ago, that you can point to. It could be more than three, but if you can think of at least three that you can remember.
It's funny that you should ask. I have one right off the top of my head.
Go for it.
As I was driving up here today, I was talking to my father on the phone. And my father is this kind of larger than life figure that I grew up with. You know him, don't you?
I met your mom, but I have not met Tony, but I know of him. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was this big like evangelist guy and all that stuff, and an amazing platform speaker, very charismatic guy. Yeah. He's 85 now, and he had a stroke about a month ago. And it's a desperate situation where he's in a room being rehabbed, and my mother's not allowed in there because of the COVID situation. And so she sits outside his window and talks to him through the screen. And it's horrible. These people have been married for forever, and they just want to be together, and they can't. And my dad has a hard time speaking. His voice is slurred, but his mind is still there. Mm-hmm. So I talk to him for half an hour every day. And it's very difficult for him, but he loves to do it because he just loves to. He wants to connect. So we're talking today, and he said, "Do you remember when you were little and we used to go to these auto races? We used to go to he said, I've been watching TV in my hotel room and I see these NASCAR races." And he says, "Do you remember when we were little? Because when we were little, I would go to church with him on Sundays where he would preach somewhere in some little town. And then after church, he would take me to the local auto race track and we would watch auto racing because I was into it. Right. So we're talking about the auto races that we had seen. And then all of a sudden I said to him, my favorite memory of that is one time when we were little, we went to one of those auto races with all these older guys that were your friends. And I said, I felt really intimidated by being with all these older guys. So he said, about a month later, we were going to somewhere else. And I remember saying to you, I'm really sorry that you have to just go with me. I know you would probably rather go with your friends. And I remember because he was driving the car and he didn't say anything. He just pulled the car off the highway, just pulled over on the side of the highway, parked it, turned to me and he said, listen, there's something you need to understand. There isn't anybody in the whole world that I have more fun with than I have with you. There's nobody I would want to go to an auto race with more than you. You are my favorite person in the world. do you understand that? And I was like, yeah. He said, all right. And then he put the car in gear and we took off.
Hmm.
And I said to him today, I was talking to him today, and I said, you have no idea what it meant to me as a 9-year-old kid to have my father, like my hero, say that I was his favorite person. And, you know, I'd never thought of it myself that way. And I said, you know, that moment was very, very meaningful to me. It kind of represented a whole thing, like where I was raised to believe that I was completely adequate no matter what I did.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I flunked a test, if I came home and flunked the 4th grade, my father would have said, "What's wrong with the teachers at your school? They don't know how to teach genius. Like you're perfect. They don't. There's something wrong with them." Like my parents really raised me with this sense of security that, frankly, neither one of them had themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They're not. I don't think either one of them is a very secure person. I think my father's drive to constantly be proving himself is all about insecurities that he had when he was a kid. And he would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, here's this really insecure person who out of his ear figures out how to make a kid feel really secure. Yeah, that's one of the great moments of my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let me filter that in, because it's a very meaningful moment. I'm listening to you. You know, I can be very visual, you know, and kind of like drawing the images of that, you know, of a grown up figure and a kid, and that relationship, which is not, as you know, as you share it, it's not all that common. It's not all that common to have that affirmation coming in. Do you think that, and as you mentioned that, and I want to kind of maybe dig into that, you say that, you know, it's, you know, coming from your parents, that they're probably experimenting into this, raising their kids into instilling into them something they probably didn't have. How does that happen? How does someone, how does, in the lack, there could be some sort of like plentifulness in some weird way? It seems like oxymoronic, but it kind of maybe makes sense in a possible way. I don't know.
I have to tell you that, you know, I've lived, you know, like I spent a lot of my life in the evangelical Christian community, right? And then, you know, over the course of many years, I lost my faith, and ultimately I had to step out of that. I just couldn't hold that narrative anymore. But all the time I was in Christianity, up until I was like 40, 48 years old, or whatever it was that I was, I always lived in the shadow of this kind of larger than life person. And everywhere I went, people would tell me about the amazing things that my father had done in their lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people were always impressed with my father for reasons A, B, and C, because of his speaking, or because of the things he had organized, the missionary work and things like that. But as I look back on it, the great accomplishment is being able to pull out of yourself, find a way to be a kind of a person that you never saw before. You know, like most people are some version of all the influences that they've had. We're like our father, we're like our mother, we're like our, you know, whoever. And this was one of those things where, like, he was a sociologist, right? He had studied a lot about the family. Like he taught courses on the family, sociology of the family. He had done a lot of study. And I look back at it and I go, like, he figured out, he thought about it, he read about it. And he was like, there's a better way than what I know. And he did the better way. And that's, to me, the greatest accomplishment, is to literally change your mind, to change yourself, to change your behavior, because you see a path that's better than the path that you're on. And Yeah, it's funny because like my dad's really at the end of his life right now. I don't know how long he's got, and so we talk a lot about what was and what happened and what it means to us, and to me that like I always it's funny because when I was younger he would always say, I'm so proud of you, I'm proud of you, I'm so proud of you, and now I find myself, I'm the one who's saying, geez, I'm so proud of you. He's laying in this bed and his dignity is stripped from him and he's got people doing everything for him. And I would have expected, knowing the guy that he was, that he would either be crying in misery over this or he would be angry as hell. And instead, he is being so patient and so kind with people. And I'm just so proud. I'm like, wow, there's a depth of kindness in you that I didn't know was there. And when I think about the way he raised me, I'm just very proud of my father because he was able to do something that he had no business being able to do.
You mentioned the as you're kind of pilgrimaging and walking kind of like in your father's shadow, and that being a good thing and a bad thing, and that in the sense of like maybe living up to a certain degree or a certain standard, but also I'll for the sake of this, I'm going to say I'll interpret it like a shadowing as a good thing, I guess as an example. And you said like your dad within the evangelical realm that basically has instilled and which basically he has been a part of for the great majority of his life. But you mentioned something that he was mainly like stepping out of of the ordinary. I'm paraphrasing kind of what you said. In the way that he approached, that he approached the Christian narrative, especially within the context of the United States. I mean, his praxis, his example seems a very drastic contrast to what you see that evangelical Christianity is in the United States. And here comes the question. in your coming out of quote unquote faith, is there a great level of impact that your dad, in his way that he lived out his faith, served as a testimony to you to live authentically enough that for you it was like almost like a direct message in his Christianity and in his authenticity? He was predicating to you, and as of where we're at now, you have come out of that in that authenticity, following that same lineage. Is there some connection? Do you find some connection in there?
It's funny, like no one has ever asked me that question.
Yeah, probably not. It was like a 500 worded question. Probably
right. But nobody has, like, people often, when I was in Christianity and I was a social justice guy, I was living in the inner city, working with poor people and all that stuff, people were like, oh yeah, you're a chip off the old block. But then when you leave the faith, people go like, oh, you've rejected your father, you've rejected his legacy and stuff like that. And
yeah, I'm saying the opposite.
And it's so funny because, yeah, right. His identity within Christendom was always to sort of reframe it and say like, I don't think this is it, it's over here, and he and a handful of people were really they led a movement within the church, within the evangelical community, of all this social justice and race stuff before there was race stuff. Like they were really, I mean, and he's just devastated right now by the fact that the evangelical community has largely swung over, like, and supported Donald Trump and all, and I'm always like, look, those people, they were never with you. You were never with them.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like, yeah. The number of people that were actually following Jesus the way you were trying to follow Jesus was always very small. But they had a significant impact on a lot of people. They drew a lot of people in. So when I left, And I didn't leave because I was angry or because I was bitter, because I got screwed over by the church. I left because, over time, living in the inner city, working with the poor, I gradually became unable to believe that there was anybody on the other end of my prayers, that there was anybody, that there was any purpose to all this. I saw too many prayers unanswered. I saw too much chaos. And I came to believe that I became unable to believe. So it isn't like I chose it. Like it happened to me. The whole Christian narrative ceased to make sense to me. And I started to go like, I think this is all invented. Like, I think this is all, I don't think this is really true. And then people go like, oh, you and your father have broken. And, we made that movie, the guy made that movie about us talking to each other. And at one point in that documentary, I ended up saying to my dad, like, look, we're very different. Very much the same, like we said. But I have never thought that the role I play in the secular community, like all these humanists and atheist groups, and like when I came out of Christianity, I started looking for like, well, where are the people that are pursuing loving kindness in a secular way? Where are the people that are fighting for social justice in a secular way? And I went to all these atheist clubs. And they were full of people that were like making fun of Christians all day, and talking about how smart they were and how right they were, and like it was all about head stuff. And I was like, no, I'm looking for the people that are pursuing loving kindness, that want to make the world a better place, that want to build loving relationships, and they want to use science and reason not as an end, but as the means to building more loving relationships. And I couldn't find those people. I couldn't find those groups very easily. And so I started organizing and talking with people and stuff like that. And gradually, like, I sort of play a role in the secular community where they go like, oh, that's that Bart guy over there. He's doing all that love stuff. He's trying to do all that fellowship stuff. He doesn't want to be in conflict with Christians. He wants to build bridges with them. And they go, he's not like, he's just that. I mean, he's kind of part of our movement, but he's kind of over there. And I go like, oh shit. I'm just like I guess the apple didn't fall as far from the tree as I thought, because when I look at my role in that world, it's very similar to my dad's role in his world. And I never thought of it until you said it.
There you go.
And yeah, I think it does come. Yeah, and I do think on some level, I grew up being used to, like, I literally grew up around somebody who was very comfortable being a little bit on the edge of his own movement, being like sort of in and sort of out of his own movement. Like, and you go like, so what are you, when you go to like some secular convention, or like when the atheist club from some city invites you to come speak, I go like, they kind of like me, they kind of hate me. Like, they go like, we agree with everything you're saying, but like, you sound like a preacher when you say it. And that like triggers us. Like, all that warmth, all that storytelling, all that stuff you do, like, that's not our style. We're more like kind of this, hardcore rationality and reason. You're speaking to people's hearts. We're trying to speak to their heads. And I go like, listen, man, you got to speak to people's hearts if you want to move them. And so it's weird, because I really do feel like I go like, if I really stop and ask, I go, why am I so comfortable being on the edge of my own movement? And I go like, oh yeah, I grew up with that.
Yeah, it isn't accidental. It is,
Thank you, man. This is like, I don't know if anybody who's watching your deal is enjoying this, but like, this has been very helpful to me.
No, para mí también, for me too. Lately I've been watching Joseph Campbell's take on myths and the power of myth. I don't know if you've ever seen or read any of this stuff.
Yeah, I read a lot.
And it's been very enlightening, because as I recall, also my departure from church and departure from Christianity, all in big quotes, there is the caricature phase where I partook of the the caricaturization of Christians. Very fervently the satire and stuff.
We all have. That's a stage.
Exactly.
Because you're really mad at yourself for getting sucked into it, and so you sort of project it onto them, and But it's okay for a stage. You just don't want to live there. You don't want to stay there for the rest of your life.
It's not very sustainable. It's not very sustainable. And there's a lot of it that's just projection. But I think it is very necessary to go through it. It's kind of like maybe shedding of feathers or shedding your skin.
It's like breaking up with a girlfriend. At some point, you have to
see.
Yeah, I didn't want her anyway, and she's an idiot. She's stupid, and because you're just trying to get sad because it's over. And then
that's why it's important to not stomp and crush people's processes with condescendence. But as I've been watching these Joseph Campbell's take on myths, I realize that we all have our myths. And as I say that, I really want to clarify that myth is not a derogatory thing. Is amoral. Is not good. Is not bad. It just is. Now I've been watching and reading on it. I realize that the sad thing about the myth, and that we can see perfectly here. Let's stick with the context of the United States. It's the literalization of the myth. It's when the myth itself is basically when you don't understand the myth, and then you have turned the myth into an idol or into a god, and then the possibility of liberation is not there.
A myth is a story that we tell.
Exacto.
To communicate a moral truth.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is that sometimes people become more attached to and more committed to the container, the story, than they are to the moral truth that it contains. And that's when you get into trouble, when people go like, no, that really happened, and it's really important that you tell it this way, and if you change the story at all, it's not true anymore. And you go, no, what really, it's the truth that the story contains, or that it communicates. That's the thing. And so, Joseph Campbell was really good at pointing out that really good myths, they come up everywhere, and they look and sound like each other, because there are these kind of truths. And like, if you said to me, like, well, why do we tell those stories in the first place? I go like, oh, because we're a species that survives by cooperating. We're a species that survives by loving each other and by caring about each other. And we come up with stories to tell our children and to tell one another, to, in shorthand, remind us of the code that we must live by if we're going to survive. And so, there's a reason why every culture comes up with a story that explains why it's important that you don't steal, or that you're loyal to your friends, or that you show reverence to your family. Like, because without those things, the community falls apart, and the tribe doesn't last. And so myth making is a survival skill. And even once you know how it works, like I'm as secular as the day is long. Like, I don't believe in magic. And you go like, but you do believe in loving relationships, right? And you go like, yes. And you have a granddaughter, right? Yes. And you go like, so how are you going to communicate that to her? Well, I'm going to explain to her how evolution works, and this is why, the hormones work this way and our brains work. No, I'm going to tell her stories. And I've got to look for stories. And it'll be most helpful if I can tell her stories that the other kids in our community are also telling, so that later on they can go like, hey, you shouldn't do that, because it's just like in that Harry Potter story when Hermione does this. And you go like, there's a value in a shared story that we can refer to when we're trying to communicate or hold each other to the morals that are necessary for our survival and are necessary for our love to grow. So yeah, myths are very important. And if you don't have good myths in your community, you'd best go make some up.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's important to keep those going, not to, not to overly become zealous about the technicalities or the technical productions of certain ones to be able to copyright them and then be able to digest them better. I think it is to look at the core and the substance of them. What's
My
important.
grandmother used to say, she would tell these great stories, crazy stories. And you, at the end of the story, you would say, Mom, did that really happen? And she would, well, I don't know for sure, but if it didn't, it should have.
That's beautiful.
And then if it didn't, it should have. And then she would say, you never want to let the facts of a story stand in the way of the truth.
Mm.
And that's the key to myths, is don't let the facts, remember that the story is not here to communicate the facts. That's journalism.
Yeah.
The story is here to communicate a moral truth. And so, but at the same time, you got to be careful, because if people fall in love with their stories so much that they end up sort of going like, no, that really happened, and you have to tell the story this way, and then you get into the kind of dogmatic stuff that, well, you see the trouble that causes.
Yeah. If that story ever served a purpose and had anything of essence, it no longer has when it becomes that. It no longer has.
And when your story, and like, if you buy into your story that way, and then you come across the ocean and you run into me, and we've been telling a different story to communicate the same truth, and we end up getting into a fight over which story is actually true. And you go, no, it was Muhammad, flying on a horse from Mecca to Medina one night. And you're like, no, it was Jesus rising from the dead after 3 days. And you go like, kid, the important thing is that the moral of that story was that we're supposed to love each other.
Yeah.
Stick with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that seems crazy, and that seems crazy and bizarre and absurd to some groups, but there's obviously a transcendental element there. And when we share with people in that plurality, and the plurality is mainly in discourse, because we're all the same.
It's funny, man.
In that,
there's similarities. It's funny. Like, my dad is laying there now in his bed, right? And as often happens to people at the end of their lives, especially in the middle of a pandemic, when the world is messed up and your movement is falling apart and your body is falling apart, like, he's really struggling. And we were talking the other day, and he was saying, like, yeah, the faith thing is hard for me right now. And he said, it's really hard. And I found myself questioning, and I was like, of course you are. Like, you're in pain, like, your ability to feel close to God and connected to God is going to be obliterated by pain. Like, pain blots out your ability to feel connected. I said, but Dad, like, nothing's changed since last year. Like, you were preaching this sermon last year, and I preached him back the sermon that he preached. And he's saying, like, Papa, you don't believe any of this stuff. And I go, like, no. Like, I'm agnostic about it. Like, I don't know if your story's true. I don't think it is. It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't seem true to me. I said, but that's been your story, man. That's your way of life. That's your identity. And I'm like, now is not the time to switch horses, right? Like, it doesn't matter if it's true factually. That's been the language that you've used, and that's been the path that you followed to pursue loving kindness. And the fact that I pursue loving kindness using different words and stories is beside the point. I want you to stick with your words and stories, because I think you need to dance with who brung you. You got to stick to your guns here. And he said, he listened to him. He said, I can't believe you're preaching to me why I need to like double down on Christianity. And I was like, hey, I know you, and that I said, I hope that if I was on my deathbed and you came over and you found me there with a Bible in my hands saying, like, I'm trying to find Jesus again, I hope you would take the Bible out of my hands and say, you put that down. That's not who you are. I know you. You need to, and I hope he would repeat back to me the kinds of words that I use to make meaning and to pursue loving kindness, because, and so that's the interesting thing is like his mythology, his language, those songs, that community, that's his whole deal. And you know, some of my secular friends are like, hey, this is your chance. He's you know, the foundation is a little bit shaky. Now's the time you can bring him over to our side. And I'm like, oh man, don't you understand? It isn't
It's the same
about
thing. It's the
winning
same
the
thing when they come and preach at you, you know, and they're like, "This is the same thing."
flourishing. It's not like, what's going to get this guy to the finish line in the best shape, you know?
Yeah.
And at this stage of the game, Christianity is his best horse. So let me encourage that horse. And some of my friends, they don't get it. But like what I say is like, if I'm right and there really is no meaning on the other side of death, like if this is it, if this is our lives, then I want that man to have the best possible finish line experience. And I don't think that's dying in confusion. And so yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that for me, having been in the Christian community, like, and you too, we were in it and now we're outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
And like, hopefully, you know, now that we're past our little angry stage of like, oh man, I could have had so much fun, or like, gosh, I had to pull it over my eyes. But like, once we get past that, we can look back and say, you know what, that may not be the right ship for us to be sailing on, but that's the right ship for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody we love is on that ship, we you know, as long as it's working for them, we should support them on that ship. Yeah. The only people I try to pull out of Christianity are the ones that are getting crushed by it.
Yeah. And I have a question kind of in that line. And I was thinking of another one before, and I think they can connect. The importance of living authentically. I mean, that's kind of like a little intro to the question. When you know, when you find yourself, you know, seriously deconstructing and seriously in the process of you know, of pre-coming out, you know, like or maybe haven't even considered it at that point yet, but when you're already, you know, flirting with this, you know, like many people call it crisis of faith or whatnot, but like when you're just deconstructing it, why do you think it was important for you to come out?
Why do I think it was important? You know, I mean, for me, if you knew me in my Christian journey, I was always moving. Like, you know, I started struggling with Christian theology like 5 minutes after I accepted Jesus as personal Lord and Savior. Like being part of the community and being on that mission was always really wonderful for me. Believing all that supernatural stuff was always really hard for me. Like that stuff never really made great sense to me. And so I was always struggling, and I struggled when they told me that we weren't supposed to be okay with gay people. And it took me a while, but then I worked my way through, and it's like I became the kind of Christian that could marry gay people. And then I became the kind of Christian that believed everybody was going to heaven, even if they didn't believe in Jesus. And then I started believing that God maybe wasn't able to intervene at all. And that, you know, God sort of was the force that guided us or gave us encouragement as we fought it out here by ourselves. You know, I was always moving. I mean, when I finally did say, you know, my friends found out I was done, it was like coming out gay. They were like, yeah, we knew. We wondered when you'd figure out that you didn't believe in God. You know, I was the last guy to know, it felt like. But the thing is, all the time I was in that process, I was openly talking about that stuff. Like that was my shtick as a Christian. It's like, I'll tell you what I'm really thinking. I'll tell you what I'm really feeling. Like, I'll tell you what I'm really struggling with. I'll tell you when I change my mind. And so it never occurred to me. I mean, I have pastors write to me from all over the country who are pastors of big churches. And they say like, look, I don't believe in God anymore either, but I feel like I would hurt so many people, or it would be devastating to the family and stuff like that. And so there are all these people that are closeted all over the place that like they're trying to decide whether or not to be authentic or to be open, or whether or not to honor certain other commitments. And like, I counsel with them, and I don't always tell them to come out. Like, it's not, sometimes they can't afford to come out. sometimes it would be too devastating to too many people. Sometimes, like sometimes people's relationships, they're not in a position to do that, or emotionally they're not in a position to do that, and it would cause them to break. But for me, because I had always been that guy, it never occurred to me not like my whole shtick was, I'll tell you what I'm really thinking. So it never occurred to me that I wasn't going to tell people what I was really thinking. Even in my relationship with my family, like, if I had stopped telling, if I had pretended to stay a Christian so as not to upset my dad, my dad ever found out about it, he would have been devastated. Because what's much more important to him than me, that we agree, was that he feels like he really knows me. And so, and my mother the same way, my wife, like my kids, like if I'm not being real with you, then we've lost everything that matters to us in our relationships. And so it never, like, there was no consideration of not coming out. But the other thing was, I very quickly realized that when I was in Christendom, there were all these people that wanted to pursue a life of love, and there were like books for them to read, universities for them to go to, churches for them to meet up at, thousands of pastors and counselors and stuff like that. You get on the other side,
Nothing.
There weren't that many pastors. There weren't that many community organizers. There weren't that many counselors. I was like, in terms of pure, like, if you want to have a ministry, the Christian church didn't need me at all. There were 15 people wanting to speak on every platform that I was speaking on. If I dropped dead, 15 other guys would have been thrilled.
Yeah. In
this world that I'm in now, you walk onto a college campus and you sort of hang out your shingle and you say, like, does anybody not believe in God but want to live a life that's more meaningful than pursuing making rich people richer? That wants to live a life that's more meaningful than pursuing material goods or hedonistic pleasure? Does anybody want to live a life of meaning and purpose and love and joy? But you can't believe in God. And people go like, oh my gosh, that's me. Help! Like where can I sign up? Like, it's not hard to recruit people for that kind of fellowship because people are hungry for it.
I'm curious to maybe get your take on this, and comment a little bit on that you answered. Most of my life, I've kind of, I guess we have some things in similar. I've pretty much been outspoken since I was a little kid. I mean, I was like the little kindergarten kid who was whom the teacher cited my parents because I was not doing my capital A all the way to the top, and I always left it all the way to the dotted lines. And then they this is a story they tell me, I don't remember. And then the teacher cited them to come over because I would not take the capital A all the way to the top, only to the dotted lines. And she would tell me, but the little Indian cannot get into the little tippy. And then she recites the whole rhetoric again, and I'm like telling my dad, probably embarrassing him, and I'm like, she's so stupid because the Indian can crouch down and get into the tippy. He doesn't need to. And so ever since I was a kid, I've been questioning everything, and I think it's kind of like a blessing and a curse. A blessing because I've always had a critical mind, and I don't buy into bullshit, or at least I try not to. And a curse because of the status quo that we're in. That's the side that might comment it as a curse, because it is not the normative. It is not normal. And being born in Puerto Rico, that also plays into it a lot. Being in a colonially run country that has never had sovereignty or the ability to run its own course, and now being in the diaspora, there's a lot of even more that plays into it, like realizing things, and then you're more of a contrast. So I'm very curious to hear your opinion about, especially now with the status quo. It is almost as factual and is almost as defining as gravity. Like, it just is. It almost feels like that. It just is. Like, it is the only thing that it is before us. Like, capitalism is the only thing.
Yeah, gravity, like wherever you are, it is.
It is. So
the gravity that you just described in Puerto Rico, right? very different than the gravity that I experienced growing up in suburban Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And like one classic way is, I think, like in Puerto Rico, you may have to fight back against many of the things that the status quo and was put to you. But probably if you would have said relationships and the community and connecting with other people is the supreme value of life. My experience of Puerto Rico is people would have gone like, oh yeah, we all know that. Like that's a common value there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I grew up, the only thing, like I'm not a rebel by nature. I don't like to create trouble. I'm not a pushback guy. But once I became convinced that relationships were the highest value, that's the only countercultural in my world where I grew up, the kind of schools I went to, the kind of people I was around. That was bizarre to people. They were like, wait, you're building, like most of the people that I grew up with, they built their lives around their careers and they built their relationships around what would enable their career.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, no, like it's your relationships, it's your community, it's your connections. That's all that matters. And you build your career to serve those things. And so that's the only place where I feel like I'm not that, I don't feel like I'm that amazingly, I don't feel that abnormal. Mm-hmm. Like I say, like too much, just like everybody else. I don't feel like I'm that extraordinary, except that I have a laser focus on that. I've become convinced that the way to live a meaningful life, the way to make the most of this life, is to build loving relationships, is to do something to make the world better for other people around you. Like whether you do that by being a plumber or whether you do that by being a social worker, I don't care. But it's like to be able to understand the work that you're doing in the world in terms of how it makes things better for other people. And then to cultivate a practice of gratitude and to cultivate a practice in which you routinely stop and reflect on your life in such a way that you are aware of what an amazing privilege it is just to like have hands that work or be able to see or be able to connect, like to be a conscious living thing in the first place, which is an incredibly improbable thing in this universe. That laser focus that says that everything else is a means to those ends. That's the only thing that I think sets me apart at all. And if I went to Puerto Rico or when I've been in like certain places in Haiti that I've been with, is that laser focus, like, oh, life is about building relationships and helping other people and trying to experience joy on a regular basis. They'll go like, yeah, we all know that, And so it's funny because I'm only extraordinary because I have very non-Western values in a Western setting.
And by law, I mean by law of contrast, and this is how you come into play and how you play your role as the character in this life, But the setting that's around you, and I want to get your perspective on this, like as you see the setting that's around you unfold, which is not in its normative, how you have establish the way you conduct yourself. So how do you relate with that setting, and specifically in the times we're in now, that all these things are coming to surface, all things that have been more than obvious, for example, to the Black community, but now are coming into the surface there and they're just becoming more difficult to ignore. That's what's happening now. And like now you hear even people that you've never heard talking about this before. Maybe it's safer for them. Like you hear pastors talk about the whole racial issue now, maybe because it's a bit safer to talk about now. Nevertheless, they're talking about it. It's just so much undeniable now. But how do you process these things and you still continue? I mean, you still continue. You allow these things to affect you, and you still continue without throwing in the towel or figuratively throwing in a towel. Just it's so many things. And I highlight my experience in the diaspora because this is not my home country to me. So this is very different to me. As Americanized as Puerto Rico can be, it's just very different. So I'm living it even more now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't, if the question is like, how do you keep going when everything's as weird as it is right now? I don't know. I think there's a children's story that I remember reading to my kids. It was called Frederick, and it was about a mouse. And all the mice were collecting food and building their nest for the winter, and this one mouse is just sitting on the fence, looking at the sunset, looking at the trees. And they're like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I'm working." They're like, "What do you mean you're working? You're lazy." He's like, "I'm doing my work. Trust me." And then the winter comes, and they all go down underground, and they're in this cold, dark place for months on end, and their food is starting to run out, and everybody's getting upset. And then that one mouse comes out and he says, "Hey, you want me to tell you about the sunset?" And he tells the story of how beautiful it is, and he describes it in detail. And they go like, "You're like a poet, like you know." And he's like, let me tell you about the trees." And they said, "We can practically see them." And they go, "Your work was important too, man. Your work was important too." And I think when you go into a dark space like we're in right now, a lot of times, if you haven't brought with you something or someone, like when the sun was shining, you better have done your work, because when it gets dark, you're going to rely on that work. And I think for me right now, I'm relying on the relationships that I built. When it was easier, when I could touch people, when I could and if it goes on too long, I won't be able to hold on. I'm burning, I built up my fat and now it's slowly burning away. And I gotta hope that the sun comes out soon, because I can't last like this forever. So I'm not I don't have magical, if somebody doesn't have any resources, and I have some people in my life right now that they didn't store away any spiritual strength. They didn't build any relationships. They didn't cultivate a certain kind of sensibility and an ability to kind of be mindful, or whatever you want to, all the different ways that people sustain themselves. And they don't have any of that. And they're struggling right now. And you say, well, how can I help them? And I go it's very hard, because it's very hard to create those things in such a dark space. I'm struggling, and I had all those things in place already. And so it's not to despair. If somebody's out there and they're like, I don't have any of that stuff, they're like, okay, well, then you better find somebody who does, and see if you can't and see if you can't, in a sense, sort of ask them to share with you, because there's a kind of life that sustains us in the darkness. And if you read Mandela in prison, if you read stories about people going through, they draw something that's there. And I guess what I'm saying is that I feel really fortunate, because the values that I got inculcated in me as a little kid meant that I spent the last 50 years not being all about my money, not being all about my stuff. And it's really good now, because a lot of my friends that had money and stuff, all of a sudden, my money and stuff is in danger, and that's what they had.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think that a lot of times in the dark, in the storms, we're sustained by what we packed before the storm hit. And this is not stupid, because this storm is going to end, and in 5 minutes there'll be another one. We are heading into a season of storms. And so people need to understand that probably some of us are going to have to learn better how to sneak up on deck, look at a rainbow, and jump back down again. We're going to have to learn how to do it on the fly. But we're also going to have to learn that when there's a moment in your life that is beautiful and good, when everybody's around and everybody's feeling good, it's important not to waste that energy, but to take it in and to take note of it, and to shore up those relationships. And you go like, why are you working on that dam? It isn't even raining yet. And you go, no, but it's going to. No, but it's going to. Yeah.
You know,
hey, bro, I have to tell you something.
Go for it.
I have to go very soon.
Yeah. I was literally about to comment on the last thing.
Okay, I'm sorry. I have to go.
So can I just mention one last thing and then we'll close with that?
One last thing.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you if you have any sort of concrete and tangible practices that you do that can be, hand down to cultivate your own spirituality, to cultivate your own mental sanity, assuming you're sane. I'm assuming you're sane.
Well, I'm doing my best. I have two that I'll give to you. One, I have that podcast. And one I talked about on the podcast, and all these people wrote to me and said, like, tell me more about that. And my wife and I were talking about how when our relationship reaches certain places, we have a practice where we will sit down together and she will talk for 30 minutes uninterrupted, and I will not interrupt her. And I just listen. And the thing about it is, because I know I can't speak, I'm not turning around what I'm going to say next, so I really listen. And she talks for 30 minutes. And then I talk for 30 minutes. But I can't respond to anything she said. I have to just talk from my heart about whatever I'm talking about. We talk for 30 minutes each. And then we go away. We go to bed. We go on with our day. And we don't talk about this stuff until the next day. And then we come back together again. And we talk. And what I find is that is a very spiritual practice. The spiritual practice of talking and really sharing your heart without fear of interruption, but also like 30 minutes is a lot of space to fill. And so you say the things that come easy, and then you say the things that come harder. But also the spiritual practice of listening to somebody and knowing that you need to just listen, because you're going to have to remember what they said so that you can respond to it the next day. That's been one of the best things that I think helps people, especially when they're living in close quarters and they're not communicating the way they want to. It's changing the pattern of communication so that you get at a different part of yourself and a different part of the other person. That's one. The other is when it gets dark in our household, before dinner, just before the food is ready to go on the table, somebody picks a dance song and we play music. We call it ecstatic dancing, and we're not dancing with each other. Whoever's around the table, we all just dance, and we're just moving. People are closing their eyes, and the idea is to get your body moving with each other in synchronicity and in connection with each other. And we laugh and we sit and we dance, and then we sit down and we eat dinner like normal. But you would be amazed at how much more alive the conversations are on the nights when we remember to dance before dinner. So those are two things that we do. Gracias.
Bart, gracias. Thank you for taking this time. And
it's good to talk to you again, man.
It's been awesome. And, good thoughts and good vibes for you and your family in this time.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's just you and me, or if there's 5 other people listening. If anybody wants to find me, you'll tell them how to find me, eh?
Claro que sí, claro que sí. So much peace, my friend. Take care. Have a good one.
Blessings. Bye-bye.
Well, guys, girls, men, women, gentlemen, ladies, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see each other next week. Y como siempre, cierro, como tenga mucha paz y mucho amor. Hasta la próxima.